Night watch on a rig is mostly a boring job. You sit in a small room with radios and monitors, you walk the deck every hour, you fill out a log every 4 hours, you drink coffee that tastes like the inside of the thermos. That's it. Most nights, nothing happens. The Gulf is dark and flat and huge, and after a while, you stop noticing it. The same way you stop noticing the hum of the generators. This was January 2019. We were on a production platform about 80 miles off the Louisiana coast, southeast of Grand Isle. 20 guys on board, mostly sleeping. I was paired with a guy we called Reyes on night rotation, but he had the flu bad and had gone to his bunk around midnight. Our lead, a big quiet man everyone called Mac, told me to just sit tight and radio if anything came up. So it was me, alone in the control room from about 1:30 midnight. Around 2, I did my walk. The wind was low that night, maybe 10 knots, and the sea was doing that thing where it looks almost oily, long slow swells and no whitecaps. I remember the deck lights buzzing over my head and the smell of diesel and salt, and somewhere below, the constant clank of the pumps working. I checked the flare, the crane locks, the muster area, everything normal. I went back up. At 2:47 I saw the light. I know it was 2:47 because I glanced at the clock on the console right after. It was out on the water at maybe our 2 o'clock, off the northeast corner of the platform. Small, about the size of a candle at that distance, not a nav light. Nav lights are red or green or white, and they blink in patterns you get to know. This was a steady, warm yellow, like a lantern. I picked up the logbook and wrote unknown light 60 degrees and figured I'd watch it for a minute. That's what you do out there. Half the things you see turn out to be nothing. A fishing boat drifted off course, a chemical light stuck to a piece of trash, a reflection from our own deck bouncing off a wave at the right angle. You wait, you watch, and usually it moves or fades, and you go back to your coffee. This one didn't move. Not with the swell, not off in any direction. It just sat there. I gave it 5 minutes and grabbed the binoculars off the hook by the door. They're these big black ones, image stabilized, the kind you can hang off your neck for an hour without your arms shaking. I braced against the window frame and dialed in. The light was a lantern, or something shaped like one. Yellow bulb, small metal cage around it, hanging maybe waist high off the water. I widened out and tried to find the boat it was on. There wasn't a boat. I want to be clear about this part because I've gone over it a lot since. There was no hull, no shape sitting on the water under it. The swell was still moving, low and slow, and I could see the lantern rise and fall a little, but it wasn't riding a boat. It was riding whatever was holding it up, which was a person. I saw the arm first, right arm, bent, hand around the top of the lantern's handle, elbow at about the level of a belt. Then the rest came into focus. A man, or a shape like a man, standing on the surface of the water. Dark clothes, long sleeves, something like a coat that hung to about the knees. Face turned toward the platform. Toward me, I guess, though at that distance, you can't really tell where a face is looking. I couldn't make out features, just the pale oval where a face should be. I lowered the binoculars. You know how when you see something that doesn't fit, your first move is to check your eyes. That's what I did. I rubbed them, I looked at the console clock, I looked at my own hand. Everything else was fine. The clock said 2:53. My hand was my hand. I raised the binoculars again. He was still there. Same position, same distance from us, maybe 200 meters. Hard to say at night. The lantern was steady in his hand, and he was steady on the water. That was the part I couldn't get past. The swell was moving through him, and he wasn't moving with it. The water was going up and down, and he was just at a level, like he was standing on a floor I couldn't see. I put the glasses down, I picked up the handset for the intercom, and then I put it down again, without pressing anything. I don't know why. Part of me was already trying to work out what I was going to say. Hey Mac, there's a guy standing on the water. You don't say that. You don't say that on a rig, especially not to a lead who's already annoyed about being short crewed. So I did the sensible thing. I went and woke up Reyes. His bunk was 2 levels down. I remember taking the stairs kinda slow because I didn't want to run and wake anyone else. The corridor lights were on their night setting, that low amber. I could hear one of the guys snoring through a door. It sounded so ordinary that for a second I thought about turning around and chalking it up to a long shift. I didn't. I knocked on Reyes's door and went in. He was under a blanket, red-eyed, congested. I told him I needed a second set of eyes on something outside and I needed it now. He didn't argue much. He'd worked with me almost a year, and I don't think he'd ever seen me nervous. He pulled on his coveralls and a beanie and followed me up. Back in the control room, I handed him the binoculars and pointed. Off the northeast corner, about 2 o'clock. Little yellow light. He found it fast. He looked for maybe 10 seconds. Then he lowered the glasses and looked at me the way you look at somebody who's had a rough shift. It's a buoy, he said. I told him to look again. I said it was a person, that the light wasn't sitting on anything. that whatever was holding it up wasn't moving with the swell. He gave me a patient look and raised the glasses. He kept them there longer this time, maybe 20 seconds. When he lowered them, he didn't look patient anymore. He just looked tired. "It's a buoy," he said again. "Check the chart." We had the sector chart pinned to the wall behind the console. I pulled it down and spread it on the desk, and Reyes leaned over next to me. He put his finger on our platform and dragged it out to the northeast. There was a small circle marked in that quadrant, a private buoy listed as a Medician sensor, deployed by one of the survey companies working the block. It was supposed to be there. It had been there since at least November. I remember I actually laughed a little. Relief has a way of coming out weird. Reyes clapped my shoulder and said something like, "Long night, man," and started for the door, because he had the flu and because he wanted to go back to bed. I picked up the binoculars one more time. I don't know why I did that either. Just to close the loop, I guess. To sit with the fact that I'd freaked myself out over a piece of survey equipment. The lantern was still there. The figure under it was still there. I looked at the chart circle, then back through the glasses, and I tried to make what I was seeing match what the paper was telling me. A buoy would be on a mooring. It would tilt. It would lean with the current, even a little. It would ride the swell. This didn't do any of that. Then I did something that felt stupid at the time, and still feels stupid now. I stepped sideways along the window, maybe 2 meters to my right, and I looked again. The face turned with me, not fast, not obviously. The way a person turns their head to keep tracking a car passing by. That small, that smooth. The pale oval that had been pointed at where I was standing before was now pointed at where I was standing now. I said Reyes' name, just his name, kind of flat. He was already at the door. He came back, and I passed him the glasses and told him to walk to the other side of the room and look. He rolled his eyes and did it anyway, because he's a good guy. He walked to the far window. He raised the binoculars. He stood there a long time. He didn't say anything. When he came back over, he set the binoculars down on the desk very carefully, like they were full of water and might spill. He looked at the chart again. He tapped the little circle with his finger twice. "It's a buoy," he said. I looked at him. He looked at me. Neither of us said anything else about it. He didn't go back to bed. He took the seat next to mine and pulled a coffee from the pot, even though he hadn't been drinking coffee for 2 days because of his stomach. We sat like that until the sky started to gray out around 6. I didn't look through the binoculars again. Neither did he. Every so often, out of the corner of my eye, I could see the little warm point of yellow out there in the dark, and I made a decision not to notice it. By the time the day crew started moving around at 6:30, the light was gone. I don't know when it went. I wasn't watching. I filled out the log at end of shift the way you always do. Weather, sea state, any radio traffic, any incidents. Under incidents, I wrote what I always write when nothing has happened. 3 words. Night without incidents. Reyes read it over my shoulder and nodded once and went to breakfast. I went to my bunk. I worked another 2 weeks on that rotation, and then I came ashore, and I never asked him about it, and he never brought it up. Not once, not even the morning before I flew out. Sometimes I think that's the part that stays with me the most. Not the light, not the face turning. The way both of us knew, and neither of us said. The thing that still bothers me about that night is how normal they looked while they were trying to take him. I worked the front reception at a psychiatric facility on the north side of San Antonio, off Fredericksburg Road, overnight shift 10 to 6. The building was one of those beige 2-story places that could pass for a dentist's office if you didn't know better. In August 2020, the whole city was half asleep from the heat and the pandemic. Nobody visited after 9. My job was mostly buzzing in the occasional cop dropping off a hold, checking IDs for family, and reading whatever paperback I'd brought. That night I had a Louis L'Amour on the desk and a Big Red I'd been nursing since midnight. The AC was set to 68, and it still couldn't keep up because the roof unit was old and someone kept saying they'd fix it. I remember the little digital clock behind me clicked over to 2:04 when I heard the tires. 3 cars. Not 1, 3. That's what got my attention before anything else. We had a small covered drop-off circle out front, floodlit, and I could see everything through the tinted glass. A black Suburban led, then a dark sedan, then another Suburban. They pulled in and parked like they'd done it before. Doors opened almost in sync. 7 people got out, 6 men, 1 woman, all of them in that in-between business casual look, slacks and button-downs, 1 guy in a light blazer even in the heat. The woman had her hair pulled back tight. None of them were on their phones. That was the second thing I noticed. People sitting in a parked car at 2 in the morning are always on their phones. They walk to the door in a loose group, not clustered, not spread out. The woman and the guy in the blazer led. The others hung back a couple of steps. I hit the intercom before they buzzed. "Can I help you?" Blazer leaned in. "We're here for a patient transfer. Should have paperwork on file." His voice was calm. Not tired, not annoyed, just calm. 2 a.m, calm. I buzzed the outer door, but not the inner. That's how it works. They came into the little vestibule, all 7, and it was tight in there. I could see them clearly now through the second glass. The woman was maybe 40, no makeup, a small silver cross at her throat. Blazer was mid-30s, clean shave, a haircut that looked expensive. The rest could have been anyone. Insurance adjusters, IT guys, forgettable. He slid a folder through the pass-through slot. "For a patient transfer at 2 a.m, I said. I tried to keep it friendly. "Family requested it," he said. "There's a private facility in Houston picking him up. We're the transport team." I opened the folder. Named patient. I recognized it. He'd been with us maybe 5 weeks. Court-ordered hold after an incident I didn't know the details of. Word around the day staff was that he was somebody's kid, and somebody was the kind of somebody where people didn't say the last name out loud. The paperwork looked fine at first. Letterhead, signatures, a case number, a discharge instruction. Then I looked again. It was the wrong kind. For a court-ordered patient, you don't get released on a family request. You get released when a judge signs off, and that comes through the medical director's office during business hours. And even then, there's a whole checklist. What they'd handed me was a standard voluntary transfer form, the kind you'd use for someone who checked themselves in. I read it twice. I flipped to the second page. Signatures at the bottom, one from someone claiming to be a physician, one from someone claiming to be an administrator. The names didn't ring any bells, but they wouldn't necessarily. I picked up the pen on my side of the counter and clicked it a couple of times, which is a thing I do when I'm thinking and don't want it to show on my face. "Give me 1 second, I said through the intercom. "Just gotta check something on my end." Blazer nodded, didn't say anything. I turned to my monitor and pulled up the patient's chart like I was verifying. I wasn't. I was looking at the standing orders page, and right at the top, in bold that I'd read 100 times without really reading it, was the line about court hold status and required judicial clearance for any release. I looked back up. All 7 were still standing in the vestibule. Not one of them had moved to a chair. Nobody was scrolling. Nobody was talking to each other. The woman was watching me through the glass with a face like she was waiting on a coffee order. "So the issue," I said, and I tried to sound apologetic, "is that this patient's on a court hold. I can't process a family request transfer on him. I'd have to loop in the on-call psychiatrist to sign off, and even then there's usually a judge involved. It might take a while." I watched them, just for a second, but I watched. Blazer and the woman looked at each other, not a long look, not a dramatic one, just a check-in. And the guy behind them, older, thicker, shifted his weight from one foot to the other and put his hand in his pocket. "That's fine," Blazer said. "We'll wait." That was the moment my stomach went cold, because normal people, when you tell them their 2 a.m. transfer isn't happening tonight, get frustrated. They sigh. They ask if there's a supervisor. They say they drove all the way from wherever. They pull out their phone to call whoever sent them. These people said we'll wait like I'd told them the fitting room was in use. I picked up the desk phone and called the on-call. Dr. R had been with the hospital forever, she answered on the 3rd ring, in a voice that sounded like she'd been asleep for exactly 4 minutes. I kept my voice flat. "Hey, it's the front desk. I've got 7 people here with transfer paperwork for a court hold patient. Paperwork looks off to me. They say they'll wait." There was a pause on her end. Then, very quietly, "Don't let them pass the vestibule. I'm on my way. Call the non-emergency line and have an officer come by for a welfare check." I said okay in the same voice you'd use to confirm a lunch order. Hung up. Dialed the non-emergency police line. Told them we had a suspicious group at the door and could someone swing by. They said 20 minutes. I looked back up. Blazer smiled at me. Small, polite. "Everything all right?" "She's driving in," I said. "Shouldn't be long." He nodded. Didn't ask how long. Didn't ask her name. The next 40 minutes were the strangest of my career. Nobody left the vestibule. Nobody sat down. The woman with the cross drifted over to the community bulletin board and read the flyers about family visitation policies like she found them interesting. The older thick one stood near the outer door with his back almost touching it, and I realized after a while that he was positioned so he could see both the parking lot and the inside desk without turning his head. 2 of the others had a quiet conversation in the corner that I couldn't hear through the glass. I couldn't tell what language. I didn't drink my Big Red. I didn't touch my book. I pulled up the patient's file on the screen and left it there, and I kept my hand near the panic button under the counter, which I had never once pressed in 3 years. At one point, Blazer walked up to the pass-through. "How long do you think?" "Should be soon," I said. He nodded and stepped back. Dr. R got there first. She came through the staff entrance at the side of the building, so they didn't see her arrive. She looked at the paperwork for maybe 90 seconds, standing next to me behind the desk, out of their sightline. Then she said, very softly, "The letterhead is close. It's really close, but the case number format is wrong, and I know the physician they've named. He retired in 2018. She looked at me. "You did the right thing." Then she went into the back office and made a call I didn't hear. The police came in 2 units, not 1, 4 officers. They didn't come in slow. They came in fast, and I watched through the glass as the 7 realized in the same second what was happening. Nobody ran. That was the part I couldn't stop thinking about later. Nobody ran and nobody tried the doors. They just stood there and let it happen. Blazer put his hands where the officer could see them before he was asked. I don't know all of what came out. Some of it stayed with the detectives. I know the documents were fake, good, but fake. I know at least 2 of the 7 had IDs that didn't hold up. I know the patient stayed on his court hold, and within 72 hours, he'd been moved to a different facility with a different security tier, and nobody told me where. The thing that took me weeks to figure out was why they stayed. For a long time, I thought it was arrogance. Then I thought maybe they were waiting for a chance to push through. Neither felt right. What I settled on eventually, and I think it's the truth, is that they'd come in expecting to be out in under 10 minutes. Signed paperwork, wheelchair to the Suburban, gone. When it didn't go that way, leaving would have looked worse than staying. 7 people in 3 vehicles peeling out of a psych hospital driveway at 2:30 in the morning after being turned away. That's the kind of thing a night guard remembers and writes up. Staying and being polite and being wrong about a form that could still, in their heads, be walked back. So they waited. They waited for a version of the night where I decided not to make the call. I made the call. I worked another 11 months at that desk before I moved on to something quieter. I never saw any of them again, and I never learned who the patient actually was. Sometimes at family gatherings, when somebody asks about the weirdest thing that happened at work, I tell them about a drunk guy who tried to check himself in for a broken heart. That's the story I tell. The other one I keep. The tower I was scheduled to service that morning sits about 40 miles off the nearest paved road, up a service track that most rental cars would give up on inside a quarter mile. In July of 2022, I was running solo maintenance for a contractor out of Billings, and this site came up on the rotation once every 8 weeks. I'd done it maybe 6 times by then. Never saw another vehicle on that road, not once. I left the yard around 4 in the morning. Coffee in the cup holder, gear in the bed of the F250, radio playing whatever came in on AM until the signal thinned out past the last ranch. By the time I turned off the highway onto the service track, it was maybe 6:30 and the sun was just starting to hit the tops of the pines. That kind of light that makes everything look colder than it actually is. The tower is on a shoulder of a ridge, elevation around 7,200 feet, part of a build-out from about 10 years ago to cover ranch country and some scattered communities on the north side of the Little Belts. Chain link fence, small equipment shed, diesel generator. That's it. No lights other than the FAA red on top. No cameras, no neighbors. You can stand at the fence and look for miles and see nothing that moves except wind in the grass. I came around the last bend and saw something at the base of the tower that didn't belong. At first, I thought somebody had left a jacket on the ground. Dark shape, up against one of the legs, inside the fence. I slowed the truck to a crawl. The gate was closed, the padlock still on it. There was no other vehicle, no tracks in the dust behind mine. Then the shape shifted, just a little, and I saw it was a person. I stopped the truck about 30 yards out and sat there with my hands on the wheel. First thought was Hunter. Somebody who got turned around, walked all night, ended up here. That happens more than people think. Second thought was that hunters aren't out in July. I got out, left the truck running. "Hey," I called. "You all right?" He didn't move. I said it again louder. Nothing. I walked up to the gate and put my hand on the padlock. Still locked. My key opened it fine. I stepped inside and left the gate open behind me. He was a man, probably in his 50s, back against the tower leg, legs stretched in front of him, hands on his thighs, palms up, facing east, into the sun. Khaki work shirt, jeans, hiking boots, with a lot of miles on them. No pack, no hat, no water bottle. The closer I got, the less right it looked. His shirt was dark down the front and the shoulders, not with blood, with water, soaked through the way clothes get when you sleep outside and the dew comes down heavy. His hair was damp too, plastered flat, but his face was what made me stop about 6 feet away. His face was burned, not blistered, but that deep red you get when a fair-skinned man sits in the July sun for a whole day at altitude and doesn't move. His lips were cracked open in 2 or 3 places, dried spit at the corner of his mouth. He was staring straight ahead at the horizon like there was something out there he was watching for. "Sir," I said. "Sir, can you hear me?" Nothing. No blink. No twitch. His chest was moving, slow and shallow, so I knew he was alive. Beyond that, I couldn't tell you. I stood there and just listened. The tower has a low hum when you're right up against it. Not loud, but you feel it more than hear it. Wind coming up the ridge in that steady way it does in the morning. A raven making noise somewhere over the trees. Otherwise nothing. I stepped closer and crouched down about an arm's length from him. He smelled like sweat and dirt and something sour that I think was just what a body starts to smell like when it's been in the same clothes too long. No alcohol, no chemical smell. "Hey," I said, softer. "I'm gonna touch your shoulder, okay?" I reached out and put 2 fingers on his shoulder, through the wet shirt. The fabric was cold. His skin under it was cold too, colder than it had any business being on a man sitting in the sun. He turned his head, slowly, not the way you turn to look at someone, the way a door swings when there's no hand on it. His eyes came around and settled on mine, and for a second I thought he wasn't tracking me. Then he focused. He looked at me like I was a piece of furniture that had been moved into the room while he was out. "I'm waiting for her to say I can leave," he said. His voice was dry, cracked, but the words came out clean, no slur, no confusion, like he'd been saying that sentence in his head for hours, and it came out ready. I didn't know what to do with that. I said, Who's she?" He didn't answer. He looked past me again, back at the horizon, and his face went blank in that same slack way it had been before I touched him, like a screen going to sleep. I stood up, my knees popped, I took a step back, and another, and got the company phone out of habit, and of course there were no bars. There's never any bars up there. The tower doesn't even cover its own footprint right. The sat phone was in the truck. I walked back to it, not fast, not slow, kept looking over my shoulder the whole way. He hadn't moved. I called dispatch, and they patched me to the sheriff's office in the nearest county, which said sit tight. They were sending EMS from a volunteer service about 45 minutes out. The dispatcher asked me twice if the man had a weapon. I told her not that I could see. She asked if he was violent. I said he hadn't moved in 10 minutes. She said don't try to load him myself. I said okay. I hung up, stood by the truck. I didn't want to go back inside the fence. That was the honest truth. I stood there with the engine running for about 5 minutes before I felt bad about it, and then I went back in and sat down on the ground about 10 feet from him. I talked to him. First name only. Told him I was a tower tech. Said help was coming. Said it was going to be all right. Just filling the air. He didn't react. Every couple of minutes his chest would rise a little deeper and settle back. Once he swallowed. That was it. I asked him one more time who she was. He didn't turn his head this time. He just said, quieter, "She'll tell me." That was the last thing he said to me. The EMS truck came up the road about an hour and 20 minutes later. 2 guys I didn't know, one named Cole. They came through the gate and knelt down and started doing their thing. BP cuff, pen light in the eyes, water on his lips. He let them do it. Didn't help and didn't fight. When Cole asked him his name, he said it, quiet and clear. It was a normal name. When Cole asked him what he was doing there, he went back to staring at the horizon and didn't answer. They loaded him on a stretcher and carried him out. His boots left 2 long drag marks in the dirt because he wouldn't lift his feet the last few yards. Cole told me later that his core temp was low and his kidneys weren't in great shape, and if I hadn't come out that morning, he might have made it another day, maybe 2. The other medic asked if I knew him. I said no. He asked if there was any way he could have driven himself up. I told him the only road in was the one they came up. He looked at the fence, looked at the tree line behind the compound, which is thick, and he said, "So he walked." I said I guessed so. That's a long walk. From the nearest place, a person could reasonably be dropped off. We're talking 11, 12 miles of steep grade through country that doesn't have trails, in work boots, without water. I finished the job that afternoon because I was already up there. Took about 3 hours. The whole time I kept looking at the spot where he'd been sitting. There was a patch of flattened grass, dark from the dew soaking out of him, and a shallow depression in the dirt where his heels had been. That was all he left. I heard the rest secondhand from a guy at the county I know a little. Treated for dehydration and mild frostbite on 2 of his toes. The nights up there in early July can still drop into the 30s, and if you're not moving and you're wet through, that's enough. He was in the hospital 4 days. Quiet the whole time. Didn't ask for anyone. On the day they discharged him, a social worker sat down with him to go over next steps, and she asked where he planned to go. He gave her the coordinates of the tower, not the address, because there isn't one, but the coordinates, to the second, and he told her he needed to go back because he wasn't finished. She asked him what he wasn't finished with. He wouldn't say. They didn't let him leave. He went from the medical floor to a psych hold 2 counties over, and after that, I stopped hearing about him. My guy at the county said the family was contacted, but nobody knew about a wife or girlfriend or anyone he might have been calling she. He lived alone, worked at a hardware store in a town I won't name. His co-workers said he was quiet and had used a vacation week and never come back. I still work that route. The tower still comes up on my rotation every 8 weeks. I've done it 4 more times since that morning. I don't do it alone anymore. I bring one of the younger guys, or I trade the shift for something in town. Or if I have to do it solo, I sit in the truck at the gate for a full minute before I open it, and I look at the base of the tower first. There's never anything there, just the fence, the shed, the hum you feel in your teeth, the wind coming up the ridge. But every time, before I get out, I check.